Welcome, Shakespeare authorship skeptics, and especially those of you who may be new to the controversy and haven't yet read and signed the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt about the identity of William Shakespeare. My aim tonight is to get you to read and sign it, and also to ask those who have already signed the Declaration to try to recruit others to join you. First, I should clarify that when I say Shakespeare, I mean the Stratford man. And when I say Shakespeare, I mean the author, whoever he was. Contrary to what Stratfordians would have you believe, the Stratford man's name was not spelled the same way as the author's name, and was probably not pronounced the same. Whether Mr. Shakespeare and the author Shakespeare were one and the same person is what the Shakespeare authorship controversy is all about. The SAC is a nonprofit educational charity whose mission is to legitimize the Shakespeare authorship issue by increasing awareness of reasonable doubt about the identity of William Shakespeare. This mission is directly counter to the orthodox claim that it is not a legitimate issue because it is beyond doubt that the plays and poems were written by the Stratford man. The SAC is neutral about the true identity of the author, seeking to unite authorship doubters of all persuasions behind the one thing we all agree on: reasonable doubt about the authorship, meaning there's a reasonable doubt that Mr. Shakespeare of Stratford was the author Shakespeare. The Declaration was written to provide a brief yet definitive introduction to the key evidence and arguments on both sides of the issue to make it more readily understandable to the public. It also names 20 famous doubters of the past, people like Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, William and Henry James, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Sigmund Freud, John Galsworthy, and former U.S. Supreme Court Justices Harry A. Blackmun and Lewis F. Powell, Jr. Let's look at some of the evidence that led such people to doubt Mr. Shakespeare's authorship. First, many people think Shakespeare claimed to have written the works. No such record exists, nor did any family member or descendant ever say that he had been the author Shakespeare. Nothing shows that there was any family tradition that Mr. Shakespeare had been a playwright. And when he died in 1616, no one seemed to notice. No record, not even a letter, mentions the passing of Shakespeare. This was contrary to the usual practice in which even much lesser writers were publicly mourned. Francis Beaumont, who died the month before Shakespeare, was buried with great ceremony in the Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. Mr. Shakespeare was buried in the Stratford Church beneath a stone slab that had no name on it. So why did anyone ever think he was the author? The case for him as the author rests largely on allusions in the first folio collection of plays, published 7 years after he died. But no documentary evidence from his life confirms their validity. If he were the author, there should be solid evidence from his lifetime. There is none. Absent the first folio, no one would ever have thought that William Shakespeare as the author Shakespeare. There are 4 main reasons why his supporters think he was the author. First, a name similar to his appears on the title pages of many of the poems and plays published during his lifetime. Second, the first folio refers to the author as Sweet Swan of Avon, and it later on refers to Thy Stratford Monument, actually monument, spelled with an I. Third, fellow actors John Hemmings and Henry Condell, whom he remembered in his will, seem to vouch for him in the folio. Fourth, the effigy and inscription on the Stratford Monument suggests that Shakespeare, spelled without a medial E after the K, had been a writer. These 4 reasons would seem to amount to a good case for Mr. Shakespeare, except each of them is problematic. First, it is not clear from the title pages that the name printed on them refers to Mr. Shakespeare. It may have been a pseudonym. The name on the works was virtually always spelled one way, Shakespeare, but it was often hyphenated, Shake-Spear, a rarity at the time, used mainly in pseudonyms. Shakespeare's name was never hyphenated in other contexts specific to him. On his baptismal record, even on his monument, the name was spelled with no E after the K. The same is true of its 3 appearances in his will. In none of these is the name spelled with an E after the K. The first folio is a large, complex topic. For now, suffice to say that other than the 2 brief allusions, it offers no further identifying information, no dates of birth and death, no names of any family members, nor any revealing episode from his life. Short on individualizing facts, the folio's contributors gave us generalized superlatives that describe the author, not the man. Why, for example, does it never simply say William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon? The first folio doesn't even show his coat of arms, as one would expect in such a publication. That would have identified him clearly. Neither Hemmings nor Condell was a writer and probably did not write the passages attributed to them. Ostensibly the editors of the folio, they were in fact wholly unqualified for the task. If the first folio so brazenly misrepresents their roles, why believe anything else that it says? And why did such lavish praise, as we see in the folio, only appear following 7 years of silence after his death? Yes, today's Stratford Monument effigy depicts a writer, but it is not the same as the original. A sketch made in 1634 shows a man with a drooping mustache holding a wool sack, but no pen, paper, or writing surface as seen today. Records show that the monument was repaired. The effigy evidently was also altered to depict a writer. The monument's strange inscription never says that Mr. Shakespeare was the author Shakespeare. It neither names nor quotes from any of the plays or poems, and it never mentions poetry, plays, acting, or theater. Epitaphs of other writers of the period identify them clearly as writers. Why not Mr. Shakespeare's epitaph? If the evidence for Mr. Shakespeare were otherwise sound, these problems would hardly matter. But once one looks beyond them, one finds no evidence that he was any kind of writer at all. Of a few great writers like Homer, we know nothing at all. But there is only one great writer about whom the more we learn, the less he appears to have been a writer, William Shakespeare. Not one play, not one poem, not one letter in Mr. Shakespeare's own hand has ever been found. The only writings alleged to be in his own hand are 6 shaky, inconsistent signatures on legal documents. If these signatures are his, they reveal that he had difficulty signing his own name. Some experts doubt that even these signatures are his and think they were done by law clerks. Shakespeare grew up in an illiterate household. Both of his parents witnessed documents with a mark, and neither of his daughters could write. He may have attended the Stratford Grammar School, but the records no longer survive. Nothing shows that he ever attended any university. Scholars know nothing about how he acquired the vast knowledge displayed in the works. Not that he couldn't have done it somehow, but how could he have done it without leaving a single trace? Stratfordians attribute the feat to his innate genius, but even a genius must acquire knowledge. No book that he owned or that is known to have been in his possession has ever been found. No record shows that Shakespeare, the author, ever received payment or secured patronage for writing. After dedicating his first two poems to the Earl of Southampton, he wrote no more dedications. Why would any writer motivated by profit, as we are told Shakespeare was, not seek patronage? Stratfordians say the Earl of Southampton was his patron, but no record shows that they ever met. Contrary to the common assumption that the author was a prominent public figure, no record shows that he ever addressed the public directly, either in person or in writing, and no record shows that either Elizabeth I or James I ever met Shakespeare or spoke or wrote his name. Not that there are no documents for Shakespeare. There are over 70, but all are non-literary. They show a Stratford businessman and a theater entrepreneur and part-time actor in London. How is it all of these records survived, but all of those relating to his literary career are lost? Stranger still, this alleged prolific writer retired in his late 40s with his faculties intact, to return to the same village from which he came, never to write a play, a poem, or even a letter. No record shows that he ever put on a play in Stratford or that any resident viewed him as a poet. Several people who knew him or who he was did not seem to associate him with the author. Scholars have found few, mostly weak connections between Shakespeare's life and the works. Why are nearly all the plays set among the nobility, portraying them as if he were an insider? Why are so many in Italy? And how is it that even obscure details in these plays are accurate? Why did he never mention Stratford or write a play that seems to reflect his own background? His detailed will, in which he famously left his wife my second best bed with the furniture, contains no Shakespearean turn of phrase and mentions no books, plays, poems, or literary effects of any kind. There are no musical instruments, despite the author's musical expertise. He mentions no writing materials or furniture, artworks, or intellectual property of any kind. He left money for rings to 3 fellow actors, but nothing to any writers or to his alleged patron. Shakespeare's will is the one document that we know for sure is the product of his mind, and it is damning to his authorship claim. It is not the will of the same person who wrote the works. Toward the end of the Declaration, we quote Hugh Trevor Roper, Regius Professor of History at Oxford University. Regius Professor meaning he was appointed by the monarch. And Roper was also, you should know, the British intelligence officer assigned to track Hitler during World War II. While he was a history professor at Oxford, he turned his attention to Shakespeare, and he wrote that he found Shakespeare's elusiveness exasperating and almost incredible. After all, he lived in the full daylight of the English Renaissance, in the well-documented reigns of Queen Elizabeth and King James I, and since his death has been subjected to the greatest battery of organized research ever directed upon a single person. And yet the greatest of all Englishmen, after this tremendous inquisition, still remains so close to a mystery that even his identity can still be doubted. There is a lot more in the Declaration, but I'll leave it there and you can read it for yourselves. It's 3,000 words and can be read and signed in 30 minutes at our website at doubtaboutwill.org. What do Stratfordians say about the Declaration? Mostly they say as little as possible because they know it is all true. A noted exception is Professor James Shapiro at Columbia University, who wrote admiringly of it in his authorship book, Contested Will, Who Wrote Shakespeare? No one has written a rebuttal telling us where we are wrong or written a counter declaration. Again, the declaration can be read and signed at the SAC's website at doubtaboutwill.org.